Let's talk about how important weight is on a motorcycle, particularly an adventure bike like this one. Is it that big of a deal? Is it the end-all be-all? Should you choose a bike just depend on how much it weighs? Stay tuned and we're going to talk about it. So the first thing I would say about weight is how is it distributed? So you could look at a stat sheet. Maybe you're trying to buy a bike and you're like, how much does it weigh? 450, 480, 400 pounds, whatever. But that doesn't really tell the whole story. Like for this bike, for example, the gas tanks are down low. So that means a lot of the weight is going to ride really low. And that makes a huge difference. I don't care how much, if this weighs more than another bike, you know, maybe even by a little or significantly more, it always depends how it's distributed. If another bike has a gas tank that sits up high, and maybe it's a large gas tank, then you're going to have a lot of top heaviness. So what that means is when you lean the bike and just a little bit, like when you're just standing there or trying to move the bike, maneuver it, it's going to lean really, and it's going to be harder to kind of pull that back upright. Whereas a bike like this, which is still, you know, off the ground a good amount, I'll show you here in a second, but because you have the weight down low, it's so much easier to maneuver. It doesn't feel like it's 470 pounds. This bike is a 790 Adventure, and it is 470 pounds. So it does, you know, it may not feel like that to you. If you're riding another bike that's 400 pounds, for example, but the gas tank's up high, it's a 6-gallon tank, that thing may feel heavier than this bike might, just because of how is the weight dispersed through the top and the bottom. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So I'm a 34-inch inseam. So I've got a little bit of bend in my knee here. So when I go around corners, this thing feels like it really sticks in the corners, whereas like my other bike, an Africa Twin, which is a little bit higher, the weight's up here, it's a 6.5-gallon gas tank, this is 5. It just feels, when I lean into the corner, it feels totally different. So not only ask yourself, how much does the bike weigh, but how is it dispersed throughout the bike? So some bikes just feel heavier, even though they may not be. So I think that's where a test ride comes in, even sitting on the bike. If you're going to a dealer and, you know, generally they're not going to have that tank full of gas, so you really can't get a super great feel for it. But if you could test ride it, they put a little gas in. But I just think, like, you know, when you lean the bike, this, you know, over, make sure I don't drop my helmet here. If you lean the bike, right, so this doesn't have a whole lot of heaviness to it, just because I feel like, you know, the gas is down here in these tanks. So it makes a huge difference how the weight is dispersed. So let's talk about some of the disadvantages of having a heavy bike. And, you know, when I say heavy, I'm talking 500 maybe plus pounds. This is definitely close to that. I would say a disadvantage is one of the obvious ones. Well, you got to pick it up. If you drop this thing, you're going to have to pick it up. So the nice thing I like, again, there's always variables. So the variable for this one would be, this doesn't sit flat on its side when it goes over, because this keeps it angled just a little bit, which makes it much easier to pick up. So therefore, the 470 pounds may not feel like 470 pounds. If you ever watch Big Rock Moto's video, he often does drop tests. He'll drop each bike, and it's not always the one that's the heaviest that's the hardest to pick up. It's so different on how the weight is dispersed and how flat does it lie on the ground. One of my hardest bikes, I have a KLX 300. It's only 300 pounds. However, when you lay it on the ground, it is flat on the ground. Like there's no, oh, it's kind of, propped up. Nope, it is flat, and therefore I feel hard to pick up, harder than this, just because this kind of sits a little off the ground when it goes down. So all variables to consider, and when you hear people talk, they don't really consider all of those variables. And so when you're shopping or when you're considering another bike, or you're trading it in and maybe you want to get a lighter bike, always think about how is the weight dispersed throughout the bike. The other disadvantage to having a heavy bike is that if you're going to ride off-road and you're going to be in any kind of a soft surface, you're going to sink a little bit more than you would on a lighter bike. So sand, for example, would be something that I, would think of right off the bat, is just, you're going to sink deeper. You're going to have to rev the throttle. Mud also. Mud, you're going to sink deeper into the mud, which is going to be a little more difficult on a heavier bike. Also, tires and things have, also variables there, but just, all things created equal, sand and mud is going to be heavier on a heavy adventure bike as you, try to navigate those off-road situations. And then, maybe you can try to avoid it as much as possible. Sand's a little easier to avoid because, you know where those places are. Mud, not so much. Mud, you can be on a dry road and there might just be a shady patch and hit some mud. So you just never really know. The other disadvantage, I would say, to having a heavy bike is just navigating around a parking lot, going into a parking space, especially if it's tall. So I'm going to put tall as a heavy, also with the heaviness. So when you're up tall like this, and maybe you're on your tiptoes and you can't flat foot, or even if you can flat, and you're trying to like move it back like out of a spot, especially if you're on a little bit of a slope. I mean, that is so difficult. So this one's not too bad because I got a little bend in my knee and I'm solidly flat footing. But all things to consider is how tall and heavy the bike is. So a bike could be 375 pounds. It could be tall, but which is, about 100 pounds lighter than this. But if it's taller than this, it's going to be harder to maneuver around when you're not really moving and you're trying to, get out of a restaurant parking lot or whatever. So those are just all things to consider when, thinking about specs on a bike. And I just hear the weight debate so much, and it's so much more than just a number. And some bikes feel heavy. Doesn't matter what it says their weight is, they just feel heavy. And some bikes just feel lighter than their weight really is. And the only way to know that is to ride it and test ride it and check it out. Now, believe it or not, there are some advantages to having a heavy bike, particularly when you're doing road riding. So, if you're primarily going to spend your time off-road, then weight is more of an issue because of, like I said earlier, the sand, the mud, and some of those conditions, the loose dirt. You're going to want something a little bit lighter to kind of blow through that stuff. But if you're, mostly a road rider and maybe you do a little off-road, a heavier bike may have some advantages. So let me tell you what some of those advantages might be. So I took this to the Tetons from Arizona, rode it back through Colorado and Denver. And this thing was great, especially when you hit curves. But when you get into those 3, 4, 5 lane highways going into Denver from the north, I was getting blown around. And this is 470 pounds. It's not exactly a light bike, but I was getting blown around big time. And I missed my Africa Twin at that point because the Twin doesn't get blown around nearly as much. The Twin is 550 pounds. I have the DCT model, and it adds 20, 25 pounds, something like that. And I just was noticeably getting blown around. I did not like it at all. So the heaviness of a bike helps you from getting blown around by trucks or other traffic kind of whizzing by you. So that is one advantage. The other advantage is if you ever want to ride with a passenger, you can take generally more weight on the bike. The heavier the bike is, the more solidly it's going to be built. The more it's going to be built for touring and holding luggage and holding a passenger. So that is like if you want to tour and you want to go, maybe a little off-road here and there, but just primarily you're on the roads, a heavier bike isn't that big of a deal. So it just really depends what is your intended use. And then generally you're going to get better suspension when you're on road. So, and you have a heavier bike because they don't try to cut weight on those big touring bikes. I mean, look at the Gullwing. That thing is a beast, super heavy, but it's meant to tour, it's meant to be on road. So for an adventure bike, which a Gullwing is not, at least I wouldn't call it one, then you're going to be probably more on road, especially the bigger adventure bikes, the Harley, Pan America, the Africa Twin, the BMW GS. I mean, those are all 500 plus pound bikes, the Triumph Tiger. So, but they're designed for big miles. And yes, you can take them off-road too. But they're, I would say, more 80-20 bikes, more 80 road, 20% off-road type of bikes. So when the designers and the manufacturers design them, they're going to think about more road comfort. So if they're thinking more road comfort, then they're going to say, well, weight is not the most crucial factor here. What's the crucial factor is comfort, right? Because I would take, 50 more pounds of weight for comfort personally, because I do a lot of touring and all that. So I don't mind the extra weight if it's going to give me a better ride. So that's another advantage, is just having the suspension. You're not getting blown around, and you can take more weight, load it up a little bit more, take a passenger, it's better on that. That's what those bikes are designed for. So if you take anything away from this video, what I want you to take away is just don't look at a stat sheet and say, oh, this is lighter than this, or this is heavier than this. There's so much more to it than that. You really have to ride it and get the feel of the bike and not just look at a stat sheet. And really, if you can tell the difference of 20 pounds between bikes, you're better than I am. And maybe you should be doing guess your weight at the state fair, because 20 pounds is negligible in my book. And when you start getting 50, 75, 100, then I think, you can notice that. I can notice the difference between this and my Africa Twin, and they're 80 pounds difference. And I definitely notice this feels a little bit more nimble, a little lighter. And another thing that kind of goes into the lightness of a bike is how big is this cockpit? So, how big, how about my legs sitting out? So, I'm pretty in, I'm still out a little bit, but, my Africa Twin, I'm out a little bit more like this. So it's a bigger body, and that makes it feel heavier to me too. So like, there's just little things like that. And how's it handle? How can you, just kind of cruise through the corners and the dirt and the turns and all that. Like, there's so many variables, and I just hear weight like, oh, I'm going to get a new battery and save a few pounds. I mean, on a bike like this, on a heavyweight, middle, upper heavyweight adventure touring bike, I don't think that's just going to matter whatsoever at the end of the day. I mean, if you want a new battery, get a new battery. I think, a lot of them come with the lithium batteries these days. Great upgrade, but I think the weight savings is negligible. I think you got to, when you start 50 pounds, maybe, I think maybe that's where it starts becoming a little bit more noticeable. But again, it just depends how it's dispersed, like we talked about at the beginning of the video. If you found this helpful at all, please give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, you know all that stuff to do. Thank you so much for subscribing. Getting a lot of new subscribers recently, and I'm really, really grateful and thankful to all of you for that. It's nice to feel that my videos are being helpful to people. I'll see you in the next video, and please remember to always blaze your own path. Take care.